Hi, welcome to Ava Stories channel. We hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching. I called upon the handyman for a simple repair, yet his confident demeanor and intense gaze ignited the room. What started off as a mundane visit quickly escalated into something very unexpected and thrilling. For me, it was meant to be a typical day, a peaceful one with no noteworthy events, as is so frequently the case. Life intervened while my husband Edward was at work, interrupting my intentions to lounge on the sofa. Enjoy the gentle sunlight filtering through the curtains and channel, sir. Famous Leslie, my stomach fell as I heard a peculiar gurgling sound and a huge splash coming from the restroom. It was the pipes acting up again once I attempted to mend them on my own. Nonetheless, that had become an even more significant disaster. I whipped out my phone and gave my trusted neighborhood handyman a call. Although the thought of someone invading my personal space still unnerved me, I knew there was no other choice. They were reliable and efficient. Despite our lack of conversation, after an hour, he came knocking on the door, toolbox in hand. He appeared to be in his early 29s with a tall, muscular build, a thick beard, and sharp features. He exuded a professional appearance. Upon greeting me, he accompanied me into the bathroom to assess the problem. I stood at the doorway watching him work, his movements confident and skilled. I should have been grateful that he was fixing the pipes, but my attention kept wandering to him, his muscles flexing. As he kneeled down to inspect the mess, I forced myself to focus. He only helps out when needed. A few minutes later, he stood up, wiped his hands with a rag, and claimed to have replaced the pipe and tightened everything up. I felt a little silly, but his composed and competent demeanor made my heart race. No further problems should arise as a result. I managed to keep my voice calm despite my racing heart as I answered, "Thank you." He stared at me for a while, his gaze lingering. His eyes seemed to be hiding something as he surveyed the restroom before finally asking, "Are you certain you don't require any further assistance?" He spoke in a very relaxed tone, yet there was an edge that briefly made me feel lightheaded. I struggled to articulate my thoughts. Did he mean what he said? Or was I just dreaming? I felt my heart racing as I tried to think of anything to say, but the awkward stillness between us prevented me from doing so. I preferred that he stay for the time being. I mentioned that there may be something more, but my voice was a bit trembling with an arched eyebrow. He advanced toward her. What on earth is that? I couldn't think of anything to say, so I whispered something under my breath, my cheeks reddening with a knowing grin. He advanced a little further. "I believe you have the courage to try." I felt my heart racing as the distance between us seemed to dwindle by the second, and I tried to open my mouth to say something, anything, but nothing came out. His presence was electric, and I couldn't control my thoughts. All I could see was him standing so near, as if waiting for me to do something. I felt a peculiar heat emanating from his closeness, as if the air itself were heating it up, and my body and mind seemed to have shifted into autopilot, both uncertain of what to do next. He remained motionless, his black gaze unwavering and a tiny smile pulling at the corners of his lips. He seemed to have grown thicker all about us. His presence was strong but not oppressive. I felt as though I was suddenly acutely aware of his every move. After what felt like an eternity, I finally spoke, my voice barely above a whisper. I still don't understand why I said it, but this time the stillness wasn't unpleasant. It felt like a fine balance, something fragile. I wondered whether he could sense it as well. My words came out in a jumble as I stated it. "I simply haven't felt right today, and you're here, and I'm not sure." He interrupted me, his voice low and comforting. "No need to explain. It's okay." His reply was so kind and sure. I looked at him in amazement. His eyes loosened and he extended a hand that was inches from mine before I could comprehend it. Perhaps we might just start to drift apart as his fingers delicately touched mine. It was a gentle touch, cautious but disturbing enough to cause my breathing to pause. Just as I was drawn to him, I believe he felt the same way about me. I felt a sudden rush of warmth which made my T constrict. I stared up at him, confused about what to say or do while his hand lingered. For a time, his poise was mesmerizing. His eyes fixed on me as if he were anticipating my next move. despite my overwhelming desire to escape. I couldn't help but leaning closer, my fingers caressing his. The electric contact intensified the weight of the moment, which was making it difficult for me to catch my breath. His smile softened slightly as he inched closer, the distance between us diminishing until it vanished completely. Anxiety was palpable in the air, and my heart was racing. My heart raced and my hands sweaty, but as soon as his fingers crossed over mine, everything changed. The unease I'd been experiencing vanished, and I felt a surge of strength. "You don't need to be nervous." He whispered, his thumb gently, tracing small circles over my hand, assuring me that we could take things at our own pace. I choked out the words that were stuck in my throat, but I nodded anyway. His presence was both intimidating and reassuring, calming my racing heart and mind. "Just tell me what you want," he whispered, his voice low and promising. I felt a chill go down my spine. As I listened to his words, his slow, steady breathing, his eyes fixed on mine, and the warmth that coursed through my C*******T from the spot where our hands were intertwined created an illusion of timelessness. Everything else seemed to have faded into the background. I was completely unprepared, but in that moment, I didn't care about the faint hum of the pipes behind us or the rest of the bathroom. All I could hear was him and the intensity of our connection. I wasn't sure who was moving, but suddenly I was standing on tiptoe trying to close the gap. His hand on my waist guided me, drawing me closer, and my breath caught as I felt his warm body against mine. "Is it acceptable?" I hesitated before responding, allowing my lips to gently touch his. At first it was just a whisper of contact, but as soon as our lips touched, I felt a sudden release of the tension and longing that had built up between us. I kissed him enthusiastically, as if I had been eagerly anticipating this moment. His voice was barely above a whisper, and his lips were so close to mine that I could feel rather than hear his words. His hands rose to softly cup my face at this very moment, kissing more passionately, as if nothing else mattered. I felt the growing tension between us as his fingers slipped into my hair, drawing me closer. Our kiss grew hotter and more passionate, and I was unable to break free. What would Edward think of this? Even if I wanted to, I let go of any doubts about the intensity of the yearning and allowed it to manifest. When we eventually severed ties, a short pause while they waited gasping for air, my face turned red. So I refrained from staring at him immediately. I felt a whirlwind of meaningless ideas, but as I locked eyes with him, I recognized a reflection of my own feelings of bewilderment and famine. His thumb continued to make delicate circles on my flesh. As his hand remained resting on my waist, his words surprised me. I confessed, my voice quivering that neither did he, and a tiny smile tugged at his lips. While it was genuine, he chuckled gently, the tension releasing slightly as he stepped back, refusing to withdraw. "Is correct. What is the next step?" he inquired, his tone taking a more solemn but yet friendly turn in an effort to calm my pounding heart. I took a long breath. I was confused about where we were headed, what our next step should be, and how to handle this unfamiliar dynamic between us. But I did know this. I refused to let it go. Just yet my heart was still racing, but I felt a strange calmness as I met his eyes in an attempt to tease him a little. Maybe this something was genuine, something that Edward hadn't been able to give me in decades. And this young, brilliant man could give me everything I wanted. Together, we can solve it. Find out, dashing handyman. What are your thoughts? As though considering my comments, he nodded slowly. He proceeded to offer me a subtle, knowing grin. The subsequent hush was appropriate. It wasn't unpleasant or embarrassing, and I was okay with it. Both of us got to our feet. We stood there for what seemed like an eternity, both of us unsure but undeniably attracted to each other. My mind raced, trying to process everything that had just happened. But my body seemed to be reacting to the palpable chemistry, and I didn't know where this was going or what would happen tomorrow. We had come to an understanding, and now I was eager to see what happened next. His fingers delicately traced the fabric of my shirt as he seemed to be trying to make sense of everything. I wanted to fill the void with words to ground myself, but they all seemed insufficient and out of place, while his hand remained on my waist. What is the appropriate response to such an incident? There are no words to describe the raw emotion of a moment that defies the tidy categories I had set aside for just such instances. I began with a trembling voice, as if I was just getting started. What is the next step? I suppose we could always begin with something easy, given his arched eyebrow, twitching lip toward a smile and sparkle in eyes, something fun yet infused with the same heat that had engulfed the air between us. I blinked slightly in confusion. Not knowing if he was serious or not, he retreated a little, his gaze fixed on me the whole time, and his hands slipped from my waist. The way he stood had an energetic and grounded quality. Simultaneously, I felt a tightening in my C*******T, confused if I wanted him to retain his distance or draw nearer. The ambiguity was both frustrating and liberating. It seemed like every movement he made was deliberate and intentional. Even when he wasn't speaking, I had no idea what was going to happen next, but I was starting to get the idea that I didn't really care. He seemed to be evaluating me as he gently cocked his head. His voice remained low and steady as he spoke. Once again, sit down, have a chat, and we can see where this goes. There's no need to jump into anything. His words were reassuring, and I felt a slight relief from the knot in my C******T that had been building since he entered the bathroom. Perhaps he was correct, and there was no need to rush into this. I certainly didn't want to make things awkward or force anything that wasn't ready to happen. Not knowing what else to do, I just nodded, going to be okay, but I appreciated the room he was giving me. I see, that makes sense. He nodded toward the compact living room space beyond the restroom and grinned a gentle, comforting smile. We can relax, sip some drinks, and have a casual conversation, in your opinion. Won't that make it easier? I went along with it, following him out of the restroom and into the living room where the late afternoon sun was starting to set. The light was gentle, streaming through the blinds and creating long shadows. The room was serene, yet there was an undeniable energy between us, a connection we couldn't quite pinpoint. I sat on the couch restless, not knowing what to do with myself. He sat across from me just at the right distance to make his presence felt, but far enough to create a noticeable gap. His body was relaxed, but there was an electric energy about him. Because of this, I was unable to unwind entirely. He moved forward ever so slightly, his elbows resting on his knees, his eyes fixed on me the whole time. Tell me, he said, breaking the awkward pause that had crept between us. His voice had the same steady, soothing quality that I had grown to recognize. Tell me about yourself. For an instant I was unsure, not sure how much of myself I wanted to expose. For some reason, being around him made me feel safe enough to let my guard down and trust him. But trust is a hard thing, and I wasn't prepared to reveal everything just yet. Reiterating my narrative with a subtle giggle, I attempted to divert attention away from the fact that there isn't much to reveal. I'm simply, attempting to make sense of things. It feels like things are occurring all the time. Yet I work here and try to make sense of it all. I was too chicken to tell him I was married. He gave a long nod. Seeming contemplative life does have a way of doing that. I felt an overwhelming sense of embarrassment as I glanced down at my hands, realizing that sometimes we're just carried away and other times we have to assert ourselves. In the past, I had always imagined myself as someone who sought to dominate and organize everything. However, right now, I'm not so sure. I felt totally helpless earlier, what with him being so near and our kiss having taken me by surprise. Perhaps that was just what I needed. I returned my sight to his locking eyes. With him are these philosophical discussions with clients, something you usually do. You seem like someone who's worth talking to, I replied. Hoping to lighten the situation, he gently chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. By the way, I still believe that other discussion is far from over. He wasn't talking about replacing the pipes. He was referring to the moment in the bathroom when our relationship began to change, and I felt a flush come over my cheeks at the thought of responding to him. There was a part of me that wanted to dismiss it as an innocent slip-up and pretend it never happened. However, a part of me was acutely aware of my strong desire to investigate our relationship. Finally, I spoke up, and Sadie guessed were not, my voice now lower and more unsure. Reclining on his seat, he relaxed. His countenance remained solemn. Although a twinkle of mirth twirled in his eyes. No need to speak out really more if you're not comfortable with that. But for now, just know that you have my undivided attention for an instant. I was utterly unable to respond to the genuineness of his voice. I looked at him and saw a man who wanted to understand me, someone who was patient and willing to wait. I confess, my voice barely above a whisper, that I've never really done anything, but I couldn't help but wonder if he was offering me more than just a simple handyman service, or if this was all just a strange game to him in the past. Performed an action similar to his request, leaned closer once again, his gaze kind yet passionate. I paused, then inhaled deeply. Honestly, I can't remember the last time I felt this kind of intimacy with a complete stranger. His smile was gentle but welcoming, and his eyes revealed a blend of understanding and curiosity. Sometimes we don't have to comprehend every word, he whispered. Sometimes all we need to do is let things unfold and have faith that everything will unfold in due time. I have no idea what it means or where it's heading, but something about it feels right. I stared at him as his words slowly sunk in, removing the barriers I had built up for so long. He was right. I didn't have to know everything at once. I could just let things happen and see where they led me without trying to exert control over every aspect. Perhaps that was what I had been lacking, a willingness to embrace the unknown. I suppose you're right, I said, a little grin playing on my lips. He rose up. Seemed at ease in this room. I should probably get going soon, he said, his tone lighter now, but yet hinting at something more. I'd like to see you again if you're up for it. I felt a tug at my lips as he spoke. A brief pause in my heart's rhythm occurred as words, and I nodded in agreement before I had a chance to question my decision as well. But this will continue. I still want to show you something you've never seen, and do something you've never done, I added. Even if I might be doubtful today, he smiled back at me, clearly understanding what I was saying, and for a moment I could see a promise or even just the hint of an unwritten chapter in his eyes. Just before stepping out, he halted as he proceeded near the door. Edward would be back from work too soon to let me do what I wanted with him, so I hated that he had to go rest and rejuvenate. Please don't hesitate to call me if anything else, he said, his voice kind yet commanding. I beamed with joy as the memory of that moment stayed with me long after he departed. I was unsure of what was next, but I felt at ease and hopeful for the first time in a long time, whatever had started between us. I was prepared to see it through, no matter how unclear it was. The next day returned to the monotony of everyday life. The sun was shining and the birds were singing outside, but the normally tranquil atmosphere felt more tense than usual. My thoughts kept circling back to yesterday, the handyman, and the way our paths appeared to cross in that restroom. I didn't anticipate giving it so much consideration, and I certainly didn't anticipate his interfering with my thoughts to such an extent. Now that I find myself unable to concentrate on anything else, I wonder if it was all just a bizarre coincidence. He may have been being kind, or it could have been nothing at all. I attempted to dismiss the possibility that I was hallucinating our connection for a brief instant. There was a haze where our personal and professional lives intertwined. I could have rationalized his self-assurance as a result of his competence in his work. But then there was the kiss, the one that made me gasp for air and ignited emotions I hadn't experienced in a very long time. While idly drinking my coffee at the kitchen counter, I became startled by the sound of a familiar tap on the door. My heart raced, and I sprung to my feet so fast that my coffee nearly spilled over the edge of the cup. I couldn't believe it that he had returned so quickly, and I was prepared for it. Will this be a test of my strength riding my heels? I made my way to the entrance. When I opened the door and saw him standing there, my stomach churned and my breath caught in my throat. I thought maybe he was coming for follow-up plumbing work, something I had forgotten about yesterday. Even though he was holding his trusty toolbox as previously, he exuded an unprofessional vibe this time. Without a doubt, that was the identical dude. He had always had a commanding presence with his tall, wide, deep-set eyes and a distinct air of calm strength. But now he seemed different, with a gaze that was less businesslike and more personal, which gave me a chill. "Hey," he murmured, his voice, gentle and somewhat gravelly, with an undercurrent of mystery. I figured I'd swing over and see how the pipe is doing. Trying to maintain my composure, I nodded, signaling that everything was fine. However, the pipe was the last thing on my mind. I tried to disguise the fluttering anxiety in my C*******T by saying it's fine. I haven't had any issues. However, my voice betrayed me. Inside he went. He entered the room without knocking his presence, filling the little foyer. His movements exuded an air of effortless confidence, but it was the intensity in his gaze that really set the mood. This went beyond a simple plumbing issue. I couldn't help but sense a shift in my body's reaction to his presence. My heart racing with each step he took. I couldn't pinpoint what it was about him that made everything seem different. It wasn't just about healing things. It felt like he had come here for something more. Where does your pipe stand? He placed his toolbox on the table as I suggested. Smiling, he asked me casually, "Do you need anything else fixed?" while he sat on the kitchen counter and glanced over his shoulder at me, uncertain of how to respond. I nervously chewed on my lip as I attempted to interrupt him. I understood his point, but I also realized that the pipes weren't actually the topic of his conversation anymore. I controlled my quivering voice. That is, unless your purpose for being here is unrelated to plumbing. As he slowly walked toward me, his eyes meeting mine, I couldn't help but believe that we might continue right where we left off from yesterday. Now that he's facing me directly, a slight grin is playing on his lips. I felt a sudden racing heart. Could this be real? Had he returned with the intention of completing our work together? He was drawing near. His presence drew me in with a shiver-inducing intensity. My gut told me to take it easy and give it some thought, but I couldn't help but let myself be pulled closer. The atmosphere between us became heavier, the same oppressive tension that had been there the day before. Only this time it seemed to be building. He cued my face gently, his touch tender but firm. I was already on my way to him, captivated like a moth to a flame. As my fingers brushed against his C*******T, I could feel his skin heat through his shirt and the faint, steady thud of his heartbeat. It was all too much. "You are not obligated to speak," he whispered. No need to intervene, simply allow things to transpire. He leaned his lips dangerously close to mine, and I couldn't take my eyes off of him. As he breathed on me, I could feel it. He was so kind and welcoming that I leaned in close to him before I could even think. As our lips met, he gently pressed down to ensure our alignment, and suddenly all my worries and reservations vanished. Everything else faded away as I became completely engrossed in his presence, the heat of his touch, the rush of emotions that seemed to fill my C******T, the taste of his lips, the feel of his body against mine, his kiss intensifying until I melted into it. The tension from the previous day vanished with each movement, and I melted into his kiss at this same second. His hands drew me further to him, and the heat of his body pushing against mine caused my head to spin. In response, I reached out and touched his shoulders, feeling the powerful muscles flexing beneath his shirt for an instant. I forgot how we had arrived at this point, couldn't recall anything other than the sensation of being utterly engulfed by him. His C******T rose and fell with the same frenetic energy I felt within, and his breath was rough. When he drew back slightly to breathe, our bodies still tight. "Do you really believe this?" he inquired. As I peered into his eyes, I sought any sign of uncertainty, but all I could detect was the same intensity, the same magnetism that had originally drawn us together. As his voice dipped nearly to a whisper, it only took me breathing in a barely audible voice for it to happen. Our kiss resumed as we walked together, not saying a word. I felt his hands creep beneath my shirt as his flesh was warm and solid against mine. The sensation of his touch sent a shiver down my spine. There was no more talking. It was an urgent desire that neither of us could resist. Put an end to the doubt. Upon my return, he bestowed upon me the means to meet my needs in this cramped kitchen where all else seemed to fade into the background. There were just the three of us. Despite the chaotic and unorganized atmosphere, it somehow felt right as we moved closer. I came to understand that sometimes the most beautiful things don't have to be explained or made sense, they simply need to be. After that, we sat in the apartment stillness, our bodies buzzing from the shock of what had just happened for the first time in a long time. I felt at peace as he pulled me into his arms effortlessly. No more questions, no more uncertainties. For once I was unaffected by what transpired next. It felt as though in that moment we both relinquished the constraints that had been holding us back and embraced the future together. When he kissed me again, this time tender and longing, I didn't feel the need to explain anything. What was important was that we were together. I couldn't help but reflect on how unexpected everything had been. One minute I was trying to fix a plumbing issue, and the next I was sharing a connection with someone I barely knew. It was easy to overthink, but it felt like a promise that no matter what happened, we had crossed some invisible threshold together. As we sat there in the soft silence, everything else faded away as I leaned my head on his C*******T and listened to his heartbeat. I couldn't help but wonder if our connection was genuine, or if it was all in my head. However, I came to the realization that it might not matter as life can present unexpected challenges. Perhaps it wasn't about possessing all the answers or even attempting to understand the moments that captivated you. Maybe it was about trusting and letting go of control. As he looked down at me, his fingers traced the line of my jaw and his touch was both gentle and firm. "Is everything okay? Are you enjoying the quiet that has settled between us?" he said, his voice becoming softer. I grinned at him, finally experiencing the serenity that had escaped me for so long. I muttered, "I'm all right," and I felt a strong sense of unity that would carry us through any challenge we faced. This is a true story shared by one of our subscribers, edited by me to ensure anonymity and security. I've changed names and some details,